Chapter 18. Winter. A figure in a heavy, fur-lined parka and hood crunched through the fresh snow with some difficulty. Fat, feathery flakes were still tumbling silently through the dark as they had for hours. Snow had fallen off and on all week, in fact, and layers from each successive snowfall had built up into drifts that were nearly knee-high in places. There were no tire tracks, no other footprints to guide the way. She was blazing her own path toward Broadview Manor, which loomed ahead, large and menacing. The house was dark but for one small light burning in a dormer window on the top floor. She nearly slipped, but caught her balance with some frantic windmilling of the arms. Wisteria was close enough now to see that the paint on one side of the house was still stripped away and had not been replaced, just as it had been since the beginning of September. On the porch there were some cardboard boxes, slowly disintegrating in the cold and wet. Mike had driven her out here, but he refused to attempt the unshoveled driveway. His car was low to the ground, and he knew they'd just end up getting stuck. He told Wisteria that he'd wait on Russell Street with the engine running and the heater on. They were home from Renault for 2 weeks of Christmas vacation. Wisteria hadn't heard anything from Brock and was getting worried. Calls to his phone went unanswered. She tried Caroline Truax, who hadn't spoken with Brock recently either. Brock's parents had a house in town, she knew, but they were on some sort of extended Peace Corps assignment, and no one had their contact information. This was worrisome. She pushed on past Brock's truck, parked at the driveway's edge. Snow was piled on the hood, the windows, and in the bed. There were no indentations in the drifts around the tires. He hadn't been out in at least a week. Wisteria clomped up the porch steps to the front door, trying to knock some caked-on snow from her combat boots. The striped leotard under her dress was cold and soaking. The boots weren't quite tall enough to repel all of the deep snow. She knocked on the heavy oak door. There was no doorbell, so she just pounded as loudly as she could. Then she turned, looking back down the hill at the long trail of her footsteps that led back to the street. Orange and white lights of downtown Broadacre sparkled in the dark. She thumped her fist on the door again. There was no response. This is not good, she thought. She peeked through a window into the living room, but it was dark inside, and she couldn't make anything out. After knocking on the door a third time and getting no answer, she began to weigh her other options. She could wait and try again tomorrow. She could call the police and ask them to make an entry. Or she could knock out a window and make her own way in, which is what she settled on after imagining Brock sick or unconscious in the house somewhere. Or dead. The thought made her shudder, and she couldn't wait any longer. Wisteria drew back a fist into the thick sleeve of her parka and punched it through a pane of the living room window, smashing it. She reached through. The window was too far, and her arm was too short, to reach the deadbolt behind the front door. Damn it, she thought, give me a break. I've never smashed out windows before. Wisteria kicked the door around the frame several times, but even her steel-toed boots couldn't splinter the frame. Guess they made things stronger back then. She was breathing hard, expelling white clouds into the frigid air. More television lied to me. This is harder than I thought. Then she remembered the cellar doors. Maybe there was a way to break the lock, or remove the hinges, or something. Wisteria tromped through the blowing snow to the back of the house. One of the cellar doors was ajar, propped open with 3 hardback books and a ceramic flower pot turned on its side. Wisteria's intuition screamed at her that something was really not right about all of this. What happened here? She thought. She wondered for a minute if maybe trekking back to get Mike would be best, but the cold burning her face and creeping around the edges of her parka convinced her otherwise. She pulled open the cellar door and ducked inside. She had descended only a few steps into darkness when her foot upended something metal that bounced down the stairs, scattering hundreds of small items like beads or pebbles. She hadn't thought to bring a flashlight, but the LCD screen of her flip phone would do, at least until the battery died. Now she could see what had been knocked over. It was cat food, a full dish from the looks of it. For Spooky, obviously. But why was the door open? Was Brock letting the cat go outside? In the snow? Wisteria reached the bottom of the concrete steps and crept cautiously through the maze of pipes and shelves. The house seemed to be alive. Some shadows grew, reaching out for her when she turned the light away from them. Others shrunk away in the glow. There was a gurgling sound from one of the pipes as water fell through it from an upper story. Ahead was the wooden interior stairwell that rose to the first floor. The phone's meager glow fell upon a light bulb covered by a thick mass of cobweb that was peppered with tiny specks of dirt. A heavy-bodied spider sat proudly in the middle. Upon closer inspection, Wisteria saw that the tiny specks were actually thousands of newly hatched spiderlings. They wriggled and scattered, trying to stay out of the light. Wisteria's skin began to crawl too. God, what if I walk right through one of those spider nests? She cringed. What if they're dropping from the ceiling onto my head? She unconsciously ran fingers through her curls, then shook out her hair. The stairs weren't far. She stepped over a thick pipe that snaked across the floor. Thwoom! The ancient furnace roared to life. She knew immediately that she wasn't in any danger, but despite her best efforts to hold it back, a strangled shriek clawed its way from her throat. She shuffled quickly in the direction of the staircase, keeping her feet low to the ground to avoid tripping over anything. The metal ducts expanded from the sudden rush of hot air, ticking and groaning. Wisteria climbed the stairs double time, her hand flicking the light switch at last. The basement bulbs flickered to life, and all of the gnarled shadow creatures vanished back into the walls. She took a moment to compose herself, then a thought struck her. Does Brock own a gun? In Indiana, she knew, defending one's own home from trespassers with lethal force was perfectly legal. More often than not, homeowners got a little too trigger-happy, and she could recall quite a few news stories of loved ones, friends, public servants, and others being shot by rednecks who mistook them for burglars. Brock didn't seem the type, but she'd have to proceed carefully. The door at the top of the stairs was open a crack. She pushed it open the rest of the way. Brock, she called. There was no answer. She slid into the first-floor corridor and looked around. This wasn't the way it looked the last time she was here. There were bags of garbage piled 2 or 3 high in the narrow hallway. Some were hanging open or split down the sides. There was a smell of rotten food waste hanging thickly in the air. Only a narrow path through the trash allowed Wisteria passage into the kitchen. Things weren't much better in there. Dirty dishes, glasses, and silverware crusty with food were piled high in the sink. In fact, it looked like every dish in the house was in need of a wash, as the cabinets themselves were mostly empty. Pizza boxes and food wrappers were piled on the stove. The floor was a minefield of cat feces. More bags of garbage were about to swallow the overflowing trash can. Brock? Wisteria shouted again, stepping over a dried puddle of what looked like melted ice cream on her way to the second-floor staircase. In one corner, a pyramid of beer cans. In the hallway, she found Spooky's litter box. The stinging smell of ammonia was almost overwhelming. The litter itself was so saturated with urine that it had formed one single sodden clump, studded with brown sandy turds. It hadn't been cleaned in a month, she guessed, maybe longer. She headed upstairs, continuing to call for Brock. The second floor was a little better, but only because 3 of the 4 main rooms were vacant. Brock's room was a mess. Unwashed clothing was strewn across the bed, the dresser, the rug. A shelf in the closet had collapsed. Beneath it, a box of glass Christmas ornaments had fallen, shattering the contents and spilling them across the hardwood. The bed was unmade. A blanket and comforter were crumpled in the corner. Only a thin sheet remained, dangling from one corner of the mattress. Wisteria climbed the staircase to the attic with trepidation. She didn't really want to go up there. She had a strong hunch that she would find Brock, and she was afraid to learn what had become of him. But she put one foot in front of the other, the steps creaking under her weight. The attic door was closed but not locked. The frame around the handle still splintered from Brock's kick all those months ago. Wisteria put one hand on the door and crouched into a defensive posture without even realizing it. Brock? she whispered hoarsely, her throat constricted in fear. There was no response. Wisteria pushed the door. Brock was lying in the middle of the room, curled into a fetal position. His eyes were closed. A pool of what looked like chunky vomit painted the floor a few feet from his body. Wisteria squeezed her eyes tightly and shook her head, trying to banish the sight from her mind. This couldn't be real. But when she looked again, he was still there, encircled by the illumination from the only light source in the room, a desk lamp on the edge of an oak dresser. Suddenly, Brock's eyes snapped open. Yanking out the earbuds he was wearing, he whirled around, tried to clamber to his feet, but stumbled over his own legs, crashing backward into the dresser. The lamp fell, the bulb broke, and everything was dark. "What the hell?" he shouted. What are you, how did you get in here?" "Brock, relax," Wisteria said. She opened her flip phone and shone the light from its screen onto him. "What's wrong?" He held his head in his hands. "I'm dying." "Did you take something?" "No." "What's the matter?" "I don't feel right. In my head. I think I'm losing my mind." "We need to get you to the hospital then." Wisteria moved to help Brock up from the floor, but he waved her off. "I can't go to the hospital." "Yes, you can. Come on." She grabbed his arm, but he refused to budge. "I don't have any insurance. I don't have any money for a hospital." "Well, what do you want me to do then? Everybody's been worried sick about you." "I don't know," he snapped. "Just leave me alone." "Look, you asshole. I came all the way out here through the snow to help you. At the very least, I'm taking you to lie down in your own bed. You can't stay up here in the dark." She tugged at his arm again, but he pulled away. "I can walk." Brock staggered to a standing position, broken glass crunching beneath his feet. He and Wisteria headed downstairs. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said. "What were you listening to? I yelled your name like 100 times." "Tapes. The police brought them. They were returning Zane's personal property. He was listening to them when he died." "Tapes of what?" Brock sighed. "Mrs. Glazer recorded them. It's sort of like her autobiography." When they reached the bedroom, Brock collapsed onto his bed without even removing his shoes. Wisteria picked up the blanket and comforter from the floor and covered him. She sat in a creaky desk chair that was missing several slats from the backrest. Brock closed his eyes and ignored her. Finally, Wisteria spoke up. "Brock, what happened to the house?" "I don't feel like talking." "I'm not judging you. I just need to know what's going on." "I'm going to take out all the trash," Brock said quietly. "I just haven't felt like it recently." "Do you need help?" Brock shook his head. "We'll help you. Me and Mike, just say the word." Brock rolled over to face the wall. "Taking care of the house is my job." Wisteria thought for a moment, and then asked as gently as she could, "Brock, where's the cat?" Brock didn't respond immediately. Wisteria watched his chest jerking slightly. It looked as though he might be crying, but it was hard to tell. "I let him go. I put him outside." "Oh, Brock, why?" "I couldn't take care of him. I figured he can get by better on his own. He's a tough cat." "When was this?" "I don't know. Maybe a couple of weeks ago." "Brock, it's so cold outside. It's snowing." Brock sniffled. "I know. It was stupid. Then I got kind of lonely. I left the cellar door open for him. Thought he might come back." Wisteria reached out and wiggled Brock's shoe through the blanket. "Hey, what's the matter?" Brock rolled back to face Wisteria again. His eyes were wet. "I feel awful. I'm dizzy all the time. like I'm just slightly off balance when I walk. You walked down the stairs just fine. Yeah, I don't know if I'm actually dizzy or if it just feels like that in my head, but I can't focus on anything I need to do. I have a hard time remembering things. Sometimes I just feel like crying for no reason, or crazy angry all of a sudden. When was the last time you left the house? It's been a while. A couple of weeks, at least. You talked to anybody? Brock shook his head. What do you do all day? I don't know. Take naps, try to relax, surf the internet, drink some beers. Do the beers help? Sometimes. Sometimes it just makes me more anxious, though. Panic attacks? Yeah, they come and go for hours, and my head feels fuzzy. You're not getting any exercise, are you? No, what am I supposed to do? There's snow on the ground. You could exercise indoors. Don't feel like it. Asteria's phone rang. It was Mike. She talked to him for a bit without giving specifics of the situation, but told him she'd be out shortly. Then she hung up. You want to get better? She asked Brock. I can help. I think I have a brain tumor, he said. You gonna fix that? You don't have a brain tumor. You're depressed. You're depressed and you have serious anxiety. This can't be all in my head. I can feel it. It's physical. Brock, trust me. I know. I know all about being depressed. It's not going to work, man. If you're not going to go to the hospital, then what other choice do you have? Brock shrugged. I'm going to come back tomorrow and we're going to go to work on you. And you're going to do what I say. Miles away, in the rented construction trailer where the Daleville Town Council held its monthly meetings, there was a full house. Among the crowd were quite a few members of Zane's Legion, Dale Dennis and Kyle Hickey, the two kids from Broadacre High, now seniors, a young professional couple, both lawyers who had helped spread gravel and mulch for paths and landscaping, held hands in the front row. Irv Hetfield was there, with daughter Darla on one knee. Constance Shepard was seated at the back. A bald, middle-aged guy with a beer belly that had offered his services as a welder to fix the gate's iron scrollwork was in attendance, along with another older, white-haired gentleman with glasses who was a retired mason. He had done a lot of work patching the crumbling wall around the cemetery, repairing headstones and cementing them back onto their bases. And Kenneth Ball from the Broadacre Sun and Herald was there with his pen and notepad. The trailer had been decorated for Christmas. That is to say, a few strings of lights had been stapled to the wood trim near the ceiling, and sparkly tinsel garlands were draped over the Jesus portraits. Even old Richard Harlan's wheelchair was looking festive. Someone had added a white angel tree topper, attached by craft wire, to one of the push handles. The Harlan clan shuffled in about 15 minutes after the meeting was due to begin. No one expected them to be on time. Their lateness was customary. It gave the assembled crowd a chance to catch up on news and gossip, and if there were first-time visitors present, they had a moment to acclimate themselves to the weird and off-kilter world of Daleville politics. The conversations were boisterous tonight. Old-timers wondered loudly what was so special about this meeting, and Zane's Legion talked amongst themselves. The town's 3 children in attendance were making enough noise for more than a dozen. All right, shut up, said Chairman Harlan, after he had been deposited into his wheelchair and rolled into position behind the folding table. The angel behind his head wobbled jauntily. We got a lot to do tonight, so let's get going. They ran through the standard articles of council business: traffic tickets, budget concerns, maintenance and lawsuits. Once that concluded, Richard pointed to Irv. Your turn. Tell him what you're on about. Irv passed Darla to Constance Shepard and shuffled up to the front of the room. He had on a short-sleeved, button-up shirt and navy blue pants with black dress shoes. Quite an unusual look for Irv, and one that he didn't wear quite comfortably. but it did look like he was making an effort. Irv took out a stack of note cards and began to read. "Thank you, sir," Irv said. He nodded to the old man and to the other assembled councilmen. He tried his best not to catch Officer Harlan's eye, though. "As you know, Hauser's Cemetery was restored this summer by Zane Truax and his group of volunteers. Many of them are here in the audience tonight, and as you may also know, Zane passed away a few months back." Irv's voice was unsteady. It was apparent that he wasn't used to this type of public speaking and was extremely nervous. He flipped his top note card to the back of the stack with a trembling hand. "What Zane did was important to our community, and we wanted to give something back. We, the volunteers, have taken up a collection. We donated, family and friends donated too." Another card flip. "Our proposal to you all: start a fund to continue the maintenance of the cemetery. We've got a little north of $10,000 to get things going. If you'll match our contributions, we'll have $20,000 to keep the place from getting all junked up again. The cemetery only needs to get mowed weekly during the warmer months. Every once in a while it'll need some repairs to the wall or some new mulch or gravel in the landscaping. Now that the cemetery is in good shape, the money should last a long time." The councilmen debated amongst themselves for a minute. Finally, Richard Harlan held up a wrinkled hand. "We appreciate what Zane did for our cemetery, but $10,000 is a little rich for our poor little municipality. We can donate $500 toward the cause." The room erupted into pandemonium. Richard banged his head on the table. "Hey!" he shouted. Someone in the audience yelled, "It's Christmas!" Another person called out, "What would Jesus do?" Rick Jr. looked panicked. Richard Sr. pounded the table again. "Shut it!" The crowd calmed down a little when Officer Joe Harlan stepped forward. They expected him to threaten to expel the crowd, to keep order through force, but he turned back to the councilmen instead. "We have plenty of money in the general fund. I bring in thousands of dollars from speeding tickets every month. We can afford it." Constance called from the audience, "How much is in the general fund? Let's see the books." Rick Jr. held up a hand. "Now, that's privileged council information." One of the Daleville women at the back of the room shouted, "Give him the money." Someone else called out, "Show us the ledger." The crowd was standing, stomping, screaming. The flimsy construction trailer shuddered and rocked. Boog stood up, sweating, and approached the crowd in their folding chairs. "Come on, guys," he said. "You trust us with this. That's why you voted us. To make these decisions." Boog's father James, the lawyer, followed up. "Mob rule is not the way we do things. The chairman of the council has spoken." Irv's daughter Darla was watching her father, standing helplessly at the front of the room, caught between the councilmen and the crowd. Suddenly, she broke away from Mrs. Shepherd and ran to the front of the room, shrieking, "Give him the money!" She hugged her father around the leg tightly. The crowd laughed, but then they took up the chant themselves. "Give him the money!" All right, said Richard Sr. "Settle down. I guess mob rule is acceptable if the mob is led by a pretty little lady." He gave the girl a toothless grin. "What's your name, lady?" he asked. Darla hid her face in her father's pant leg, so Irv answered, "This is my daughter Darla." "All right there, Darla. You win. I think you may have a future in politics, my dear." Richard rotated his wheelchair to face his son, Rick Jr., and sighed. "Start a fund for the upkeep of the cemetery. We'll call it the Zane Truax Fund. Make a transfer in the amount of $10,000 to get things started." Brock went to sleep, but was awakened a few hours later by a heart that was pounding painfully in his chest. He rolled over and tried to ignore it, but the heart wasn't having any of that. How long can my heart throb like this before it gives out? Brock thought. Am I on the verge of a heart attack? Am I going to die tonight? Will someone find my decaying body in the house weeks from now? These thoughts chewed on the corners of his mind until his head was hot and scratchy. All he wanted was for this pain to stop. Will I ever feel normal again? Sweat dripped from his brow and rolled into his eyes. He had to get up. Sitting still was no longer an option. Adrenaline was taking over. His rational mind was hardly in control any longer. Brock stood, shaking, and threw on a wholly Renault University sweatshirt before stumbling downstairs in a panic. No time for shoes. He had to brace himself against the wall several times to stay upright. Where was he going? He could only think, outside. The wind was howling through a broken window pane in the darkened living room. Brock didn't even care. He ripped open the front door and stepped onto the porch, descended the steps, and high-stepped out into the yard. Good. Away from the house. Maybe I'll feel better now. He could hardly feel the wet, frigid snow under his bare feet, or the wind cutting through his light sleepwear. It didn't matter. All he could focus on was his head spinning, the horrifying thoughts, wildly guessing what could be wrong with his body, and what might be done about it. The overwhelming feeling of dread. It isn't going away, Brock thought. What else am I supposed to do? I just want it to stop. Brock lay down in the snow, staring up into the night sky. Gentle snowflakes alighted on his face, melted into his skin. Maybe the cold would chill him past the point of freezing his body. Maybe it could numb his emotions as well. He didn't want to die, but he couldn't imagine living the rest of his life this way either. Can Wisteria really help me? Does she even know what to do? Maybe I'm just broken, and maybe there's no solution. He tried not to think about death, tried not to picture potential malfunctions of his body's complex and fragile organic systems. Was this diabetic shock? Heart failure? A brain tumor? A rapidly spreading virus? Just plain insanity? Of course, trying not to think about something never works for anyone. He shifted focus to his chest and short, clipped breath. It felt as though he couldn't draw a complete lungful of oxygen. This is more than just anxiety. It must be something wrong with my body. He punched the snow in frustration. Now what? I'm not comfortable here, and I'm not comfortable inside. There was a sharp pain in his scalp, a scraping, like sandpaper being dragged across his skin. It was warm, though. Something moist. Brock reached back to brush it away, and his hand touched wet fur. He rolled over. It was Spooky. The cat, his fur dark and flat with dampness, had been licking him. Oh my God, man. Come here. Brock could hardly form the words with frozen lips. It came out more like, oh my God, man. Come here. He stood and saw a long line of cat tracks recording Spooky's trek from the tree line at the edge of the property right to the outline of his own body in the snow. He scooped Spooky up to his chest and returned to the house. Together, they went upstairs to the bathroom, where a towel was found to swaddle the cat. Brock turned on the hot water faucet in the tub and let the room fill with wonderful swirling steam. He was starting to feel again and noticed how chilled he had become outside. His exposed skin hurt as it thawed. Spooky was struggling, trying to escape the towel wrapping, but Brock held fast while he fluffed the cat's fur, drying him as best he could. At last, Brock peeled off his own wet clothes and dropped them onto the floor. He slipped into the water up to his neck and closed his eyes. That was when he realized that his anxiety had subsided. It was still there, lurking right inside his chest, but it was in the background, like the volume had been turned down. Suddenly he felt silly for thinking that he was about to die. Spooky stood on his hind legs to stare at Brock in the tub. He put his front paws on the porcelain lip and lapped up a bit of the warm bath water. That's nasty, cat. Brock scratched Spooky's head. Glad you're here, though. What a strange, fortunate coincidence, the cat coming back when he did. Otherwise, I might still be outside letting myself freeze, Brock thought. He was grateful for the little guy. Things were okay for a short while, but Brock worried about tomorrow. The madness would return. It always returned. Brock woke in his bed the next morning to the sound of someone calling his name. True to her word, Wisteria had returned. He looked at his watch. 10:31 a.m. Way too early for this, he thought. He wanted a couple more hours of sleep. Maybe extra rest was what his body needed? Could be that he needed to relax and recharge. But then Wisteria had swept into his room, dragging him out of bed. "Can't you wait around for a couple of hours? I need more sleep," he said. "Nope, get up." "I want to go back to bed. Leave me alone." "It's 10:30. Are you sleeping this late every morning?" Brock nodded. Wisteria tugged Brock's arm and pulled him to a sitting position. "You're going on a new sleep schedule. Bed at 11. Wake up at 7. Every day." Brock groaned. "I already don't like this, and we haven't even started." Wisteria put her hands on his shoulders and looked Brock straight in the eye. "You want to get better? You do exactly what I say, or I'm not helping you. By the way, I smashed out your window downstairs trying to get in the house last night." "I noticed." "Mike and I are going to assist you in fixing things up around here." "That'd be a big help, actually." "Now, go take a shower and get dressed." "I don't need a shower. I'm good. I had a bath last night." "No," Wisteria said. She grabbed both of Brock's arms and jerked him to his feet. "Shower and clean clothes every morning. Go to it." Brock grumbled but staggered off down the hallway to the bathroom. On his way, he called out, "Spooky came back. He's around here somewhere." Wisteria squealed. When Brock wandered slowly downstairs into the kitchen, rubbing his hair with a bath towel, he found Spooky and Wisteria waiting for him. The cat was curled up on the dining room table, in the middle of a sunbeam streaming through the window. Wisteria was cooking something on the stove. It smelled delicious. "I'm done," Brock announced glumly as he pulled up a chair. "Good. What do you normally eat for breakfast?" "I don't usually eat breakfast." "What do you normally eat for lunch, then?" Brock thought for a moment. "Pizza. Microwave stuff. Whatever's around." Wisteria held up a fistful of packages that she had collected from the trash can. They were wrappers from burritos, boxes from ready-made steak sandwiches, TV dinners, and frozen chicken nuggets. "This stuff? No more. You're going to start eating 3 meals a day. Healthier food. I'll cook today. Tomorrow, it's your turn." "Oh, that's going to take forever, though." "Yeah, well, what are you doing all day?" "Nothing. You have plenty of time." She slapped eggs and bacon onto a plate and set it on the table in front of Brock. "I also washed your dishes." "Thanks," Brock mumbled through a mouthful. It was pretty good. He still wasn't sure it was worth all the effort when he could just throw something in the microwave, but a home-cooked meal was a rare treat. "After today, that's your job too." "All right, Mom. What else you got for me?" Wisteria huffed. "Yeah, you need a mom." Brock was beginning to feel a little jittery. It didn't take long for the anxiety to set in after waking. Sometimes it was there even from the first moment that he opened his eyes. All he really wanted to do was go back to sleep and drift off into nothingness where the panic couldn't reach. "So, what is the plan exactly?" he asked. "How is this going to work?" Wisteria dropped into the kitchen chair opposite Brock and lit a cigarette. "This is it. You're doing it." "Eating breakfast?" "Starting a routine. Getting into healthier habits. Keeping your mind occupied." "You're going to tell me about healthier habits while you sit there and smoke." Wisteria blew out a cloud. "First of all, do as I say, not as I do." She smiled wryly. "Because we're fixing you, not me. Secondly, I'm allowed to have unhealthy habits because I'm keeping my life together right now. You are not." Brock's heart was beating faster. His vision swam at the edges. He rested his head in his hands and tried to imagine relaxing images, but all he could picture was himself keeling over in the middle of the kitchen. Yeah, well, this plan isn't working because I did everything you said, and I'm starting to lose it again. No, this isn't going to be a quick fix. You have to do it every day. No exceptions. It's getting worse. You'll have some panic attacks. I'm not promising that you won't. Give it some time. I'm here. And what if it doesn't work? I have complete confidence that it will. We need to find something to occupy your mind, a hobby or a goal, something mentally taxing. You can figure out what that might be. There was a knock at the door. Wisteria stood up. There's Mike. Get up. We're going to take all this trash out of here, and you're going to help. Mayor Jimmy Moon looked over the small press room at the Broadacre City Hall. Its last refurbishing happened just after he was elected for the first time. He had been 35 years old, and he was 84 now. Almost 50 years he had been here, and the room needed another facelift badly. The deep blue walls were scuffed and dirty from decades of reporters and concerned citizens bumping into them. Chairs were splintered and broken. The carpet was threadbare from millions of footfalls and chair legs wearing it down. Even his microphone, once the best money could buy, now only worked on occasion. Usually, he'd just shout himself hoarse from the podium. The curtains draping the stage had holes and tears that maintenance workers had temporarily patched dozens of times with safety pins. The whole room was completely unbefitting a municipality with such a grand history as Broadacre, but no one wanted to pay more taxes or even cared about maintenance and upkeep of the building, really, as long as their own petty concerns could be voiced. It was a problem that the next mayor would have to tackle. Mayor Moon was tired of hearing everyone's whining and yet still having to put on his mayor face and smile at them, nod, pretend like he cared about their opinion that, for example, sidewalk chalk should be banned within the city limits. He remembered people decades ago as being more civic-minded, showing up regularly to these conferences and meetings out of a sense of duty, not just when they wanted something. The mayor looked over the predominantly empty rows of chairs. Other than the press, which consisted of Kenneth Ball from the Sun and Herald, and a couple of junior reporters who just needed the experience of covering city business, there were only 4 people in the audience this afternoon. He sighed. Not too many, but who knew what kind of complaints these 4 had? Probably just some pothole somewhere that they'd gotten themselves worked up over. He was looking forward to retirement now and becoming just Jimmy again, not the elected representative of these grabby, pushy folks. Of course, he knew that people would still want to talk shop, see him as an in with local city politics, and drop their stupid concerns in his lap. But he was quite looking forward to being able to tell everyone to piss off whenever they got irritating and go back to reading his books and walking his golden retriever. He felt less energetic than he had after prior elections as well. Suits no longer fit him as they once did. He seemed to be swimming in them now. He was losing weight and his hands shook too. The ladies weren't swooning over him as they once did back in his heyday. Some of those ladies, the most beautiful ones, could even be enticed into his office for a little fun after a drink or two, but that hadn't happened in decades. His own wife had passed 8 years back, and he wouldn't even have to feel bad about the little dalliances now, but no. The fit and trim ladies saw him as a historical curiosity, or as an obstacle to getting what they really wanted, which was political favors or the boost of social capital that comes from being in close proximity to power. Screw it. It was someone else's turn to deal with all this crap. Mayor Moon tapped the microphone. There was no reverberating thump. He'd just have to turn up his own volume. Ahem. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started. Just a couple of things today. I'm going to make this brief. He took a drink of water. As you know, next year I will be 85 years old, and I will have served as the mayor of this great city for 50 years. During that time, it has been my privilege to work with you, my constituents, on the goals that matter most to our community. We kept taxes low. We brought new industry and jobs to the area. We've created an environment ripe for development, as demonstrated by the North Broadacre project. One of my life's greatest pleasures is speaking with the people of this city and listening to your perspectives on the issues that matter. I have loved working with people to solve problems, from small things like road repair and the sidewalk chalk ordinance, to the large projects like multi-year budgets and zoning proposals. And I think the people of Broadacre agree that the results have been spectacular, as they have re-elected me 12 times. But I can't last forever. I'm feeling the weight of my age now. Time keeps moving on, and I just don't have the energy that I once did. He paused for dramatic effect. Therefore, I am announcing today that I will not run for re-election next year. No one in the audience seemed too upset, and that irritated him. I hope my successor will try to run the city as I have, humbly, morally, prayerfully, and with guidance from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Thank you for your support, and God bless. Kenneth Ball raised a hand as the mayor was turning to step down from the podium. Moon sighed. Yes, Ken. Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate your service, and you'll be missed. You're very welcome. One question related to city business, continued Kenneth. Jimmy Moon knew what was coming. He tried to get off stage, but now he'd have to handle this. God, would he be happy when he didn't have to deal with reporters and rabble-rousers anymore. Are you aware of the toxicology results on Chief Ellsworth in regard to the Zane Truax incident? I am. Then you know that she had been talking on her cell phone at the time of the accident, and that there were high concentrations of painkillers in her blood. That's what they tell me. Do you have a statement? Look, the fire chief has always done outstanding work. It isn't illegal to talk on your phone, and those painkillers were prescribed by a doctor. I'm not sure what you're getting at. I'm saying that it might affect the finding of fault in any potential legal action. Moon shrugged. About that, I can't say. It has been well established that Mr. Truax was wearing headphones at the time of the incident and had a blood alcohol content higher than the legal limit for driving. I stand behind our brave men and women in uniform, our military and police officers and firefighters, and I'd hope that you do as well. Of course, sir. Anything else? Kenneth flipped his notepad closed. No, sir. I think that's it.